All right, thanks, Bianca. And thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm pretty excited to be hosting this webinar. We've got a great lineup of panelists who are going to share their experiences and research that they've all been working on. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I am based in Adelaide. I acknowledge and pay respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands I am speaking to you from. I acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and I respect and value their past, present, and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. So my name is Jack Hetherington. I am based at the Centre for Global Food and Resources at the University of Adelaide. I'm also a committee member of RAID. So RAID stands for Researchers in Agriculture for International Development. And RAID tries to connect, engage, and support early and mid-career researchers, primarily based in Australia, who are passionate about agricultural research and international development. RAID is the program of the Crawford Fund, and RAID has been receiving for its beginning in 2013 a lot of support from ACIAR, the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. I primarily work on a project called Indo Dairy. It's an ACIAR funded project, and my colleague Vita will be talking a little bit about that project today. But I'm the host today, and we've also, this webinar is being being brought to you from a number of other people who I'll just quickly acknowledge. So Bianca Das and Shanice Van Haften and Sophie Lownton. So thanks to everyone there. In terms of the format of the webinar today, so we're going to be having 4 speakers who I'll introduce later. They'll be presenting for about 10 minutes, and at the end there's a Q&A function. So questions we ask, everyone looks on their screen, if it's via Zoom, there's a Q&A button. So please put your questions that you'd like the panelists to answer, please put them in there. There is a chat function, and there'll be websites and resources that will be posting in that section that you'll be able to follow up if you would like some more information about an organization or a project or a report that we're speaking about today. But yes, please use the Q&A function for any questions. There'll be also a couple of polls during the webinar, so they'll come out as we launch those. And there'll be a recording of this webinar made available after the session today. So we've actually just launched one poll at the moment. So this is a bit of a fun one. So what is your breakfast of choice? So please answer which one you feel is most relevant to you. And while that's happening, I'll just give a bit of an overview or a bit of background of the webinar and what we're hoping to achieve today. So I don't need to try and convince anyone, but there's been a seismic shift in the world ever since COVID-19's the pandemic's hit the globe, and it's had an immense impact on everyone's lives. And so this is no different to smallholder farmers. However, exactly how these impacts are being realised are different in the different production systems, the different geographies that we all work in. And so this webinar is really trying to share some of those experiences that are being seen on the ground. And we've got a couple of case studies from Vietnam, from Indonesia, and also Jono, one of the presenters, will be talking about cassava from a number of different areas. So we might have a look at the poll results. So the poll has now been closed. We have a very clear winner of muesli and cereal. 38% of people have said that's their preference. And we've got a number of coffee drinkers as well. So that's great. Thanks everyone for participating in that. Very useful data indeed. Now, I might now introduce our first presenter. And so that's George Chapman. So George is actually a RAID committee member, and he's also an author on the ACIAR COVID-19 Rapid Assessment Report. And George, I'll hand it over to you now to speak a little bit more about that assessment. Thanks, George.
Okay, thanks for the introduction, Jack. I'll just get my presentation up. Bear with me. So yeah, as Jack mentioned, we've experienced a crazy few months, and I guess for a lot of you working in agricultural research for development, it's changed a lot of how you go about your work. So in my short 10-minute presentation today, I'd like to share some work I was involved with for ACIAR back in April. And as COVID erupted and hit, we decided to conduct a rapid assessment and response to some of the information and dialogue that was coming back from ACIAR's country partner offices. And so this assessment was predominantly focused on the Indo-Pacific region, and where ACIAR's, a lot of their research is being implemented. So throughout the rapid assessment, we did a lot of Zoom calls with various researchers, and also a lot of research through other publications that was being shared through the likes of FAO, ILRI, and other research organizations. So I'd like to mention the first sort of 10 intersecting challenges which we came up with as their core themes throughout this research. A lot of what was common of displaced people, which was placing and exacerbating already existing pressure on local food and resource systems. Transport suspensions, closure of borders, and disruption of supply chains had a big impact on the movement of food. And government interventions also changed the way countries were able to access export markets for both imports and domestic production. So it also had an impact noticeably on employment levels. And one interesting point which I'll touch further on is, like, a lot of in Central Asia, the agricultural workforce is predominantly from migrant labor forces. So in the likes of Nepal, it was estimated 3 to 4 million people had to return home as a result of COVID. And these other themes that were common across the research and the rapid assessment are here. And you can look, I think if we share the link to the report, it's got a more detailed analysis on each of those 10 themes. But today I'll be touching on 3 of those 10 themes, which I found probably to be the most common and significant in terms of threats on the global food system. So the first theme, which I thought was a common and sort of an important issue to touch on here, is that the already existing threats prior to COVID have been amplified. So food systems in many countries, as we know, were already under stress from a range of natural and emergency animal diseases, and as well as pest outbreaks. So back in April, for an example, there was that Cyclone Harold devastated the Pacific Islands, and that created a lot of infrastructure damage and also destroyed a lot of crops for the smallholder farmers. And then so COVID sort of amplified that crisis in the fact that they couldn't distribute immediate food aid, and this the closure of distribution channels and roads and the likes limited the availability of aid to get to those who were suffering. And then in East Africa, we've seen the intensification of the locust plagues. And those locusts have actually bred into the hundreds of millions now and have ravaged through a lot of the cereal crops in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia. And that the locust plagues are now spread to Central Asia and in Pakistan. So as COVID erupted, for farmers who are experiencing this, the problem with the locusts, then they had issues around accessing immediate inputs and in particular pesticide use. So you can see here, it's like further exacerbated these problems on food aid and the availability of important inputs for smallholders. The second theme, which was quite common amongst their discussions, was the large-scale migration of displaced people continue to place significant amounts of pressure on local food and resource systems. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of countries, agricultural industries in the Indo-Pacific region rely heavily on migrant labour forces. And on one of our calls with a researcher in India, he mentioned that in the north, they'd just harvested the wheat crop, and though as a result of COVID, a lot of the migrant labour forces had to return back to Nepal, and they were unable to get the crop, although it had been harvested, they were unable to get it to processing and then off to market. So again, the disruption in transport systems and also labour forces has weakened the ability of food supply chain to access, to be able to control the typical functions along the chain, from planting, cultivating, harvesting, processing, and then transporting. And then the third important theme which we came up with was that a lot of smallholder farmers are very dependent on accessing microfinance and low interest loans. However, as a result of COVID, as we know, it's created an immense pressure on a lot of countries' economies. And as a result, banks are becoming very risk adverse, and they're no longer offering credit to the smallholder farmers. So there's been widespread credit freezes, rapidly declining repayment rates across the microfinance sector. So again, this is having huge implications on smallholders' ability to access immediate inputs, such as seed, fertilizer, and even be able to pay their labour force to help establish the upcoming crop and planting season. I'll also like to touch on further problems have been more like back to the household level. So for instance, a lot of people who are typically employed in agriculture are now having to look for work elsewhere, and they may be migrating back to urban environments, whereas everyone's looking for work, so the price of labour is being increased, and people are becoming more vulnerable at the household level, and in particular, women and children. Prior to COVID, have already been more vulnerable group, but I think now that more than ever are facing the harsh realities of COVID and their inability to access employment and proper food and nutrition. So what's next for this response?
Hey George, just a quick heads up. You're at 9 minutes now, so
Okay.
in a minute or so. Thanks.
So stage 2 of this response is currently underway by ANU and ACIAR, and they're ultimately going to be doing more of a deep dive into those 10 interconnected themes. And hopefully what will come of that by the end of the year will be some more concrete actions, whether it will turn into policy response, that ACIAR and will be able to help inform local governments to ensure that the future shocks and the food systems are more resilient. So thanks for tuning in, and I think the next speakers will be able to give some more concrete examples and case studies. Cheers, Jack.
Excellent. Thanks, George. Very short presentation, but covering a lot of ground. And as George said before, the report is actually in the chat section, so you can go check out all those 10 themes in more detail. Now, we've actually just launched the next poll, so we'd like to hear from everyone about where they're joining us today from. This is in the Zoom function for those joining us from Facebook. It'd be great to see where we're reaching, including some participants from overseas. So while people are responding to that, I'll also just briefly introduce our next speaker. So Dr. Nguyen is an associate professor at the Vietnam National University of Agriculture. Nga actually joined us last month, so it's great to have you back with us. Where RAID is partnering with VNUA in a volunteer assignment. So thanks, Nga, for joining us. Now, we're still getting some responses to the poll question now, so if everyone can please submit, and then we can clear that out. All right, great. So it seems that joining us today, we have most people from East and Southeast Asia, which is fantastic for everyone. I think some of the presenters today might have a bit of an influence of that. So, but yeah, it's great to see people joining from a variety of different places. Now, I'm going to hand it over to you, Nga. Thanks. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nga, now teaching at Vietnam National University of Agriculture. I now involved into ACIAR project on livestock production in Vietnam. One is the safe pork and the other is the beef cattle production. Now, today I'm talking about the impact of COVID-19 to Vietnam's smallholder pork value chain. Just a quick glance in Vietnam. Vietnam is just a brief view about Vietnam. We have about 96 million people with 9 million farm households. Agriculture contributes about 14% of GDP, and total meat production in our country is estimated at about 5 million tons this year, where pork contributes about 69% of production. It is estimated that per capita meat consumption in 2018 is about 26 kilograms, and about 60% come from pork. The pork industry in Vietnam basically divided into subsectors. One is the smallholder with approximately 3 million producers, and more than 95% of them is smallholder with less than 100 pigs in their barn. And aside from that, we have some large integrated firms such as CP Group or Dabaco or Masan Group, who produce feed, piglets, and contract with farmers to produce live pig, and they process and into food and also sell. So give you a generic smallholder pork value chain in Vietnam, which we have under the Pig Risk project with ACIAR and International Livestock Research Institute in 2013. For smallholder pork value chain, we have the farmer. They produce about more than 40% for the trade, for the outside of the province, and even we export to China, and more than 50% to be consumed locally. This is show you some picture of the smallholder pig barn and the slaughterhouse and the meat retailing at the traditional or wet market, and this is in the supermarket and food store. Now, I think the COVID-19 in Vietnam, we got the first infected case in March, and today we have more than 1,000 infected cases. The Vietnam government also applied the social distance and lockdown of the economy, and the head of the lockdown economy is in April, which also affect the economy with the GDP growth rate at the first 6 months is estimated about 1.8%, very much decreased compared to around 7% compared to the last year and the year before, where we experienced very low growth rate in crop and livestock production at about 0.8%. Now, the COVID-19 is also the factor that amplify the impact of the disease outbreak we experienced since February 2019, which is African swine fever. We have no vaccine yet, and the pig mortality, if infected, is 100%. The African swine fever create a pig mortality of about 6 million pig deaths, accounting for about 8% of the total production. But the thing is, most of the pig death happen at the household production, so it's very much affect smallholder. And in June 20, it is estimated we have 1.6 million ton and decreased by 9%. So we experience supply shortage of the pork in Vietnam market, and you know that pork is very important in meat consumption basket of Vietnam. The Vietnam government also import pork from Russia, from Canada, and some other country. So here is some observation for the impact of COVID-19, which amplify the impact of the African swine fever to the smallholder pork value chain in Vietnam. In the production function, we observe the decrease of the number of producers because of the African swine fever, very much affected with the very high pig mortality, and they are very slow in recovering, and many of them cannot recover because of the loss of pig mortality, and the other is a low income and saving from other off-farm activities, where it is reported that 50% of labor in Vietnam is affected by the COVID-19, and the urban unemployment has rose by 33%. So for the rural family waiting for the income from job in urban, they got no the saving from the family member working in urban. The other thing is the very high cost of production, like after the African swine fever outbreak, the pig net cost increased by 3 or 4 times as compared to before, and also due to the lockdown, the restriction and lockdown of economy, the feed industry, which imported a lot of ingredients from other countries, also affected. So the cost of feed also increased. But we also experience very different income distribution among big farm households in the rural area, where the smallholder, they lost the pig due to the disease. They cannot recover. But for some other household, smallholder, big smallholder, they can keep and not affected by the African swine fever. They got very high profit because of the high price in the market due to the shortage of supply. So we see some become very rich in the rural area. In the collection point, we see the decrease of the collector and the scale of the operation because the lack of the supply after the disease outbreak and the lower sale. For the slaughter, we also observe that the decrease of the slaughterhouse because of the lower sale that decided by the demand side. I will speak later. And the lower profit because with higher input price, like pig, but the margin is lower. And also because of Vietnam government also import pork from other country, which reduce the price in the market. So we observe that the number of slaughterhouse also decrease. Also for the retailer at the wet and traditional market, we also see the lower number of meat retailer because of lower margin. Instead, we observe in the modern outlet, like the food supermarket and food store, the increase the pork volume. And in the consumption, we see the clearer of the impact of the COVID-19, and also both the disease outbreak for the pig production, lower demand. The pork price is almost double, can up to $8 per kilogram, and lower income to the lockdown of the economy, the unemployment, the lower income for the household, but the close of the restaurant and food service and the restriction from the movement also affect the tourism, which is very much affect the demand for the food. And the manufacturer, shoes, and government are those are top sector for export of Vietnam, also heavily affected because of demand of the importing country. So
sorry to interrupt now. You got about 1 minute, if that's okay.
Yeah, about to finish.
Okay, thank you.
And but one of the thing is reported today that the pig and the pork price now decrease due to mostly due to the lower imported pork price from the Russia. And the thing is that the consumer are getting used to the cheaper and chilled and frozen pork. So this is may become a challenge for smallholder pork production in Vietnam. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nga. Fantastic presentation. And I'm sure there's lots of people who have very good questions. And so I'd just like to remind everyone that if you do have a question, go to the Q&A function in Zoom. If people are joining us from Facebook, you can post your questions in the comment section and we'll try and answer those later on today. The next, we've got another poll. So we'd like to hear from everyone about what career stage do you think you consider yourself? So are you a student? Are you early to mid-career, mid to late career? And also what sector do you work or study in? So university, government, private sector, or NGO? It'd be great to find that out. And again, just a reminder also that we are posting links in the chat function. So the projects that Nga spoke about, you can find the more information there. All right. And just as people finish responding to the poll, I'll also introduce our next speaker. So my colleague on the project I work, Ibu Vita Hanifa, who's a researcher working in the Ministry of Agriculture. So Vita, you may wish to open up your presentation and start sharing your screen. And I know that we have a number of participants today joining us from Indonesia. So selamat datang everyone from Indonesia. Now we've got our poll results ready. So as you can see, we've got predominantly early to mid-career researchers and also postgraduate students, and mostly people working in university or research institutions. So that's fantastic. Thank you everyone for completing that poll, and I'll hand it over to you, Vita. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Jack. Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon. I'm Vita Hanifah. I'm a researcher in Indonesian Center for Agricultural Technology Assessment and Development, part of Indonesian Agency for Ag R&D under Ministry of Agriculture. Today I will be presenting about impact of COVID-19 on dairy smallholders in Indonesia. Okay, to start, I would like to show you a very brief overview about dairy industry in Indonesia. It is concentrated in Java Islands. About 99% of dairy cattle population is here, and that accounted for 95% of domestic milk production. Most of smallholders in Indonesia managing 2 to 3 cows and each producing 8 to 13 liters per day. The figure here, I want to show you the gap between production and demand. I put also import there. So as you can see here, there is a huge gap between production and demand, and that means that there is room for improvement for dairy industry in the future. For the figure in year 2020 is an estimated figure. That's a brief overview. And then next here, I want to introduce shortly about Indo Dairy and the team that I'm working with. Indo Dairy run from 2016 to next year, and it's a research, collaborative research funded by ACIAR, and it's led by the University of Adelaide, especially by the Center for Global Food and Resources, and partners with Australian and Indonesian researchers, including from Ministry of Agriculture and IPB University. My role in the project is an extension support, and I'm working closely with Jack Hetherington, our moderator today, and with the village level researchers. You can see here the happy faces. We have a fortnightly meeting to keep us updated with what happened with our farmers. So all data and information I'm presenting here, I gather from the report they send us regularly. Okay. Then these the key points I tried to address during my presentation, that COVID has impacted on smallholder as well as dairy cooperative. Intervention of Indo Dairy project ended just before the pandemic. But during the pandemic, our VLRs who work individually in 4 districts in West Java province are keeping in touch to monitor and communicate with the cooperative, also with group leaders about farm practice in each site. Here, I divided the impacts into 4 sections: on farm or production, milk delivery, distribution, extension activity, and cooperative. The first one, impact on farm or production. Farmers face forage scarcity during dry season, and it's like usual. It used to be since June. And they also faced a shortage of tofu waste, particularly in early pandemic. But now it's back to normal, but tofu waste as an alternative feed source has the higher price than before the pandemic. This led to farmers to feeding more rice straws, and this decrease milk production. And next, the case from Garut, cooperative in Garut, provided dips and iodine for all the members for free, but it only ran for 2 months due to COVID that restricted traveling, so restricted movement. There is one case with a support farmer in Focus Farm Bogor, so that COVID-19 has no impact on his business. Instead, this farmer practiced feeding molasses and soybean meal. This one, the knowledge and experience that he learned from Focus Farm, and that increased his milk production by 1 to 2 liters, and it brings more profit to him. And then the second one, impacts on delivery or distribution. So there is a case in Cisarua with a cooperative that has milk production decreased because there was a competition with middlemen. Farmers send less amount to coop. There's a relation with the point number 2. The COVID also impact on the less frequency for truck to collect the milk, because truck traveling to its location to collect the milk from farmers, so less traveling. Then farmers prefer to send to middlemen who buy their milk with higher price, because middlemen sell directly the milk to end consumers. However, the case in Bogor showed that there is no middleman due to COVID-19, as Bogor had the highest rate of COVID cases. There is a really restricted movement in Bogor at the time. So farmers still send to cooperative, and some also sell directly to loyal customers in surroundings, the nearby, so no need to go that far. So I see here that COVID really has raised an awareness for people to keep a healthy life, and that bring to the increasing fresh milk demand. The third one, impact on extension activity. There is no meeting with farmers in big number of participants to avoid virus transmission, and extension doing visit one-on-one, and also they join a lot of online training, as now there are available offers online events. So they also sharing posters, especially among VLRs and extension staff in for cooperative under the project. Extension staff also distributing posters and newsletters in milk collection points. Some of them also hanging the poster in the wall, especially the poster about the protocol at the farm that released by government. Some also sending electronic files of poster to farmers using WhatsApp numbers, so farmers still keep informed about the technology. And the last one is very important one, to motivating farmers to apply the protocol at farm to keep them safe and healthy, so they can manage their business profitably. The last one, this is cooperative protocol during pandemic that has been presented by the head of Union of Indonesian Dairy Cooperatives, or GKSI, in a webinar a couple days ago. He said that while at milk collection point, the cooperative must provide face masks to farmers who send the milk to the MCP, and then cooperative also must provide hand wash and sanitizer in the area of MCP, and encouraging physical distancing, such as when farmers are in queue to check their milk quality by staff in MCP. I see that we are really together facing this pandemic, this difficult situation, and hope it will end soon. Well, that's all from me. Thank you for your attention. Hand it over to you, Jack.
Thanks very much, Vida. Fantastic presentation and perfectly on time. So thank you for that. So we are going to move on to our next presenter. So Dr. Jonathan Newby, or Jono, who is the regional coordinator of CIAT, one of the CGIAR research centres. in particular a cassava program and country manager, including for the Alliance of Biodiversity and ACIAR in Lao PDR. So thank you, John. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. It's nice to join, and it's as close to as Australia I'll get for some time, it seems. So what I wanted to kind of outline a little bit, we've heard from a couple of markets that are quite focused on the domestic market. We haven't had anyone looking at vegetables, which perhaps are even more impacted. But from the perspective of cassava, it really is a global commodity that, and smallholders are linked into this value chain through quite a range of different local value chains and feeding into that. But essentially, as all ACIAR projects, of course, are looking at how we improve the livelihoods for smallholder farmers like this family in Cambodia. In all the work that we do, we try to work across scales. So we're always looking at how these external forces, be it market shocks or policy shocks, or in this case, COVID, impact first local value chains, household livelihoods, and then the activities at the field level. So today I kind of want to just really briefly touch on a few different levels, and we're going to start at the level. But first, when we talk about value chains, and I'm sure everyone knows here that like a farmer isn't a farmer, and it's very difficult to look at what the impact on a household is. There's many different types of households that are linked to very different sorts of value chains, and the impact that we're seeing in the region really depends on which value chain you're actually in. Are you engaged in cross-border trade? Is it direct consumption or linked to domestic processing? So yeah, it's kind of a complex question. It's difficult to answer what's the impact. But before we get going, I think cassava is probably one of those commodities or crops that people know very little about. So we've got a bit of a challenge. People can enter the chat, which is being monitored, and some ideas what you think cassava is actually used for. We'll give a prize for the most obscure answer, and you get bonus points if the consumption's increased due to COVID. So we'll come back to that later, but you start filling out the chat. But basically, it's a multi-billion-dollar crop, largely farmers in Southeast Asia exporting to the world. And as I said, most farmers know very little about what the crop's used for. Governments don't, a lot of researchers don't, and unfortunately donors also don't. And when we look at what's happening in cassava, it's often not what's happening in the cassava value chain that's impacting. It's often in the substitute market. So what's happening in maize markets globally, and of course COVID having a very big impact in South America, where a lot of maize, say into Vietnam, originates from, and also the US. And so yeah, it's not only the area that we're talking about. So we're looking at the impacts in Southeast Asia, but it can be what's happening in South America that's driving market prices here. Just basically to outline, and we heard before, farmers are exposed to a whole range of shocks, and when it's a global market, there's a whole range of external and internal shocks. So in the last few years, farmers have dealt with policy changes in Chinese maize markets, floods, droughts, new diseases, and now COVID. So it's not something that's unique, and as was outlined at the start, farmers are responding to a number of challenges, and this just makes things even harder. In terms of production and at the household level, this is just an indicative calendar from one village, but I think largely in the area we were kind of lucky when COVID hit and when the lockdowns happened. Most of the crops had already been harvested, and the rice crop hadn't been established yet, and basically we were allowed to travel within the country before those critical windows for establishment happened. So governments and industry have worked to overcome some of the border constraints for cassava, but we weren't really in the main trading season, so it wasn't a huge challenge at the time. As we heard before, yeah, again, farmers aren't farmers, so a lot of better off farmers who aren't really in urgent need of cash often delay their harvest to later on, and some of those households were struggling to get labour, and often the processors are Vietnamese or Chinese, and they'd gone home for Tet or Chinese New Year, so some households didn't harvest the last of their crop. And one of the things that's kind of not clear is, you can see these photos, there's a huge amount of disease in these fields. So a reservoir for disease for the current season, which may have some impact. Well, yeah, when we talk about cassava farmers, there's very few farmers that would identify and say, I'm a cassava farmer. As we all know, farmers manage a diverse portfolio of activities, and that being farm and off-farm. And I think at this stage, it's really through that non-farm part of the livelihood that we're seeing a lot of impacts. And this was, again, outlined in those 10 points from George at the start. So just in case of Laos, there's a large population of Lao migrant workers who typically work in Thailand in various industries, and a lot of them have returned. So the estimates a few months ago was over 100,000 migrant workers had returned. And of course, this not only puts pressure on the food system here, but also a huge reduction in remittances, which is a significant part of the household total income. So these impacts are going to be fairly significant in the coming year. So yeah, I guess in terms of restrictions and movement, in the past, like diversifying your livelihood has really been one of the main mechanisms for households to manage some of their agricultural risk, be it production failures or market risks. And that's basically been removed for a lot of households, which is one reason why farmers actually like growing cassava. It doesn't require a whole lot of labour. You can, especially if you're not managing it well, you can establish the crop and basically go and work in Thailand and then come back for harvest. So this decline in remittances is likely to continue. It's going to result in household debt in a lot of cases where people have borrowed money for crop establishment. But yeah, if this is ongoing, you start to see issues with social unrest as the economy slows down. And we're kind of really interested to see what's going to happen with youth. I mean, it's not the first time that we've seen return labour. During the Asian currency crisis and the Asian financial crisis, there's a lot of return from the cities to agricultural areas. But I guess, yeah, it's interesting to see how youth today who have kind of aspired to working off farm are reintegrated back into rural life. So basically, the cassava market in the region is really one market. The national borders are kind of, to some extent, irrelevant, but they do create logistic costs. But logistics can make and break a business. So basically, we see a flow of both products and planting material, and then capital and technology and labour between the different countries in the region. The flow of product from Cambodia into Tay Ninh in Vietnam here is significant. Basically, no.
Sorry, about 1 minute left.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Basically, no processing is occurring in Cambodia, so that's all going across the border and has to be dealt with. So again, we didn't really, the lockdown was here, we didn't really have those constraints which are going to potentially happen later. There's some changes in price, due to stockpiling and falling quality if things get delayed at those cross-border things. And of course, Indonesia is still part of that story. So basically at this stage, in terms of the production system, COVID lockdowns didn't really have any major impact. But I don't think the stakeholders are really planning for what would happen if we had a lockdown towards the end of the year during peak harvest and planting season. So it's something that should be really pushed to start making those contingency plans now. The impact of migration's kind of unclear, but will be significant. And of course, the macroeconomic situation is going to continue to decline. So there's some of the issues we see here in the cassava sector.
Okay, thanks, Jono. Rightio. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in that we'll get to in a second, but we might just introduce the last poll. And so a bit of context behind this one, but ACIAR and other research organizations are thinking about how they operate in terms of conducting their research. And so ACIAR and RAID are keen on hearing about, from a RAID member's perspective, if an opportunity were to come up for you to be posted overseas for, say, 18 to 24 months, would you consider applying for this job? So while people are responding to that, we might ask the first question, which we've got here from Jenny Hanks. I guess this is to all the panelists. What do you think the long-term impacts of COVID will be on smallholder farmers? Will they be able to recover, or what options might be possible to diversify or find alternative approaches? Now, do we have any volunteers to take that one first? And I might ask the panelists to share their video as well. Alrighty. So I might volunteer someone. Jono, do you want to have a crack at that one?
Yeah, I mean, I've been posted overseas for 15 years. At the current situation, you know, with the family and not being able to come back is kind of a bit of a challenge. But yeah, for us at the moment, it's probably a great place to be. But if things start to go south, you know, it's probably not.
And in terms of, I guess, in cassava, what do you think the longer term impacts of COVID might be for smallholder farmers? And do you think, is there an opportunity to recover? Will they just need to diversify, or more off farm income? What do you think?
No, I mean, the market will continue to grow for cassava as long as people, there wasn't many answers in the chat, but as long as people continue to use, you know, processed food and dairy products and frozen goods and paper and textiles, the market will continue to be there, and the value chain seems to be sorting it out. So it's not really going to be a challenge there. It will be more, you know, what's happening in other parts of the livelihood. So yeah, typically it's been the other way. There's been a flow of labour out of areas producing cassava to cities, which we're seeing reversed. Whether that changes wage rates and things like that's yet to be seen. But I'm not so concerned that COVID is going to impact demand for cassava. We have a lot of other bigger problems to deal with in the region around cassava disease rather than COVID.
Anyone else want to add to that question? Nya or Vida, George?
Jack?
Yes.
You first, please.
Yeah, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to add something to the Jenny question. Just specifically in case of smallholder in big value chain in Vietnam. So at this moment, the smallholder, they have heavily impacted by the pig disease, and also very slow recovering, as I saw. But the thing is, because of the COVID-19, with the lower income for the consumer, they may be switching on the low price, cheaper price imported product from Russia or other country. So this may threat the smallholder pork value chain in Vietnam, where we traditionally provide a pork consumer with the fresh, warm meat because that's the preference. But if the consumer preference change, maybe the smallholder may be faced with the competitiveness from the cheap import. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Peter, did you want to add anything in terms of the dairy?
Yes, very short answer for me. In Indonesia, I think there will be an opportunity for farmers to explore more about the local feed resources because they're restricted movement, and also to cultivate their own farm. Some farmers have their land, but they don't really manage to plant forages with a high quality one. So it's time for them really to thinking about how I produce the good quality feed to feed my cattle to still keep my business. And in terms of the marketing level, that could inspire farmers to process their milk production from their own farm and then sell directly to consumers. So that's also generate income for them. That's all from me.
Thanks, Peter.
If we add one more.
Sure, yeah, George.
I think one example and thing that's something that's looking a bit promising is the increase in public-private partnerships and companies, I mean, such as Sunrise, which is an Australian-owned company, is now doing things like building a processing facility in the Philippines for smallholder rice farmers to, I guess, scale and access larger markets they predominantly wouldn't have access to. So export markets and stuff like that. So I think that's one thing that could be looked at further.
Excellent. Thanks, George. We got maybe just one. We're kind of quickly running out of time, so we might just have one more quick question. And so that kind of answered. Nga wrote an answer, but might throw it to the other panelists. How should researchers change their focus to support smallholders better? Has COVID changed our knowledge gap? Did anyone want to add to that? So I guess, yeah. Well,
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk, and we heard about some of the initiatives in Indonesia using WhatsApp and things like that. Definitely there is a digital divide in terms of who has access to that, and I guess in different countries, looking at this, the implications on gender, who controls mobile phones and has access to information and things like that. Definitely, I think, and something for ACIAR to reflect on maybe at the end is the value in the scholarship program and how that's enabling the connections between Australia and partner countries. And I know that's kind of been reduced due to budget constraints previously, but maybe it's a time to reflect on how important it is to have those contacts in partner countries that have studied in our institutions in Australia and have really strong bonds to keep things going. And then having, of course, partnerships is just essential from national level down to the district level. Often you can't travel between provinces, but if you have good connections to the district and staff with capacity there, then you can have a virtual meeting and then they implement the activities. So, partnerships between different areas is essential.
Thanks, Jono. Apologies, I think we might have to wrap it up there, but thank you very much again to all the panelists for your time and providing the very useful insights that you spoke about today. Also, just thank you for everyone who's joined us today on Zoom or on Facebook, and for the questions and chat. I don't know, Jono, did you find a good answer in the end about your cassava question? I saw cassava cakes was one.
Yeah, maybe when you're locked down, you're eating a lot of cakes and frozen pizza and things. But no, I was looking for your hand sanitizer is often made with alcohol from cassava. And when you put your rubber gloves on, there's that fine dusting that's also made from cassava starch often. So they were something that I would have given a special prize for. So we'll consider who gets the rubber gloves and alcohol later.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Johnny. And just again, thanks to everyone else who helped put this webinar together. There's a lot of effort that goes into putting these on. So thanks to those behind the scenes, Bianca, Shanice, Sophie as well. And Raid's got a number of activities that we're working on in the future. So the best way to find out about that is to go to our website and sign up as a member. It's free, and you get to hear about other events that we're organising into the future. So thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you or joining in another event in the future. So thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks very much. Cheers.